All right, nerds for humanity. We're back. And we have Gabriel Cornejo, who ran for president, challenging Joe Biden, one of the very few who put their name out there to try and shake things up in the Democratic primaries. And I saw Gabe on the Nerd Show before, but also briefly in person when we were both in New Hampshire. He as a candidate and me as a volunteer member of the Phillips advance team. And I'm just delighted to have you back on the show, Gabriel. How you doing?
Tom, thank you for having me back again. I'm doing well. Honestly, that New Hampshire experience was tough. I don't know about you, but when I came back, I was sick for 3 days, bedridden. It was tough being out in that cold weather, but it was awesome to be in that experience. I tell people that in New Hampshire specifically, it feels like the Olympics of politics. It's what I imagine. What is it, Olympic Square, where all the athletes are all collectively in
Mm,
one place amongst the
yeah.
those that are there. The same thing happened with the political arena. Everywhere you go, there's cameras, there's politicians, there's those constituents that are eager to engage. It
hmm
was quite the experience. How was your experience?
I mean, it was incredible to the extent that I'd always seen presidential primaries from the small screen and watching from my living room, but actually being on the ground, walking through snow, going to like diners way up in northern New Hampshire, or retirement communities, and getting ready for events. It was just like a that's definitely not the typical environment I've seen, in my normal job. Um, but it was also deeply satisfying to participate in the democratic process at that level, and
Sure.
at that, in that kind of like really, you can't get closer to the ground. You've got first in the primary voters, and you've got candidates, and you're trying to make stuff happen. So yeah, I have fond memories. I also, the day after the primary, I was just out of gas. I mean, frankly, a couple days before the primary ended, I was like running on fumes. And so it's a tough life, being in a campaign. And hats off to everybody who competed. And I wish we had any of the challengers kind of go further, but here we are, and I'm proud that we gave it our best shot.
Well, I was super pumped to meet you in person. Honestly, that was a delight, especially knowing that New Hampshire was so cold, and you're a fellow California kid, so it's one of those things that we're not really built for that type of climate. And I remember watching a voter go to the polling place, and he's in a t-shirt and shorts, and I had 5 layers on, and my mind was blown. I was like, I don't know what's happening here, but we are not the same species.
Yeah,
I,
yeah,
I felt ill-equipped.
yeah. If you're not used to that weather, and in fact, like the fact that so many people, tens of thousands of people, came out and voted in that on that cold, January morning, and cast their vote. You gotta take your hat off to the New Hampshire voters. Like, they really take that stuff seriously. And I was so impressed how many New Hampshire voters like took time out of their schedule to go to events and ask hard questions. And many of them really looked at themselves as stewards of the democratic process. And I think in some ways, I hope the Democratic Party continues to give New Hampshire a very important role in the primary process, because that's not something that you could replicate in any state. Um, that level of civic engagement, and also because
Yeah.
it's such a small state, like candidates can get out there and meet with a meaningful percentage of them. Whereas, like, if you had a California primary, you'd have to spend tens of millions just to get on the air, you know?
Yeah, trust me. I know I lived it, and I'm super glad. But I think that they were extra pumped to get in and vote because, of course, the DNC decided that they weren't going to hold their primary in uh, because they knew that Dean was doing well, right? So they wanted to take away the value of that vote, and I know that that lit a fire under New Hampshire's voter bloc to get out there.
Yeah, there were definitely a lot of New Hampshire voters who were not pleased with kind of being kicked out of the primary process. And I was super pleased with the outcome for the Dean campaign. I mean, 19% is not no, you know, nothing to kind of take for granted, given that, you know, nobody really knew who Dean Phillips was when he started in New
Yeah,
Hampshire. Still, I'm sure there's plenty of people who don't know who Dean Phillips is.
yeah, sure.
Yeah, it was great to see you at that event too, and I still remember how the three of you, like you, Dean, and who was the third candidate? You guys,
Frankie Lozada. He's based out of New
yeah,
York.
yeah, Lozado, yeah. So the three of you guys were up there, and it was like a moment where it was like, you know, hey, this should be an open process, and nothing should be you know, kind of assumed or inherited, or you know, there's no coronation. Like, people should compete. Um, what are your
Let's
thoughts?
get
Yeah, what are
let's
your
give your
thoughts
voters
now?
some, or let's give your viewers some context. So, just around the Democratic primary, if you weren't fully informed, there were a lot of obstacles put in place by the DNC, including canceling primaries in states like Florida, North Carolina,
Mhm,
Tennessee. Maybe not canceling it in one facet, but there were definitely obstacles. So, for example, myself specifically, Massachusetts, just right below New Hampshire, the Democratic Party had the authority to add whoever they wanted to the ballot. And then if the Democratic Party didn't act, then the authority of the Secretary of State was afforded to decide who gets to be on the ballot. And that's where, as part of my experience, which would differ from Dean and Marianne Williamson, I don't have millions of dollars like they both had available for their campaigns. So the Secretary of State said, well, you, Jason Palmer, who ended up winning Samoa, Frankie Lozada, we did not get on the ballots per the Secretary of State. So it was very frustrating to go through this whole process. New Hampshire was beautiful in that they allowed everybody on the
mhm.
ballot, right? As long as you're willing to pay the small fee. But it's one of those things that this whole experience opened my eyes about the democratic process. And of course, Kennedy knew that this was going to be an obstacle, and so did Dr. Cornel West about the Democratic Party's attempt to try to rigged the election in favor of Biden. And that's the shame of it all because in those states like Florida and Delaware, where the primaries were canceled, you took the rights away from the voters. In the states like Tennessee, North Carolina, you took the rights away from the voters to decide who their champion should be. That to me infuriates me even more than I was already infuriated by the DNC's lack of commitment towards trying to shape our country for the majority.
Yeah, you described it as a rigged primary. Obviously,
Yes.
those are strong words. I mean, my sense is they structured the rules to give extreme advantage to their preferred candidate. Uh, you use
That's
rigged is
rigging,
like even
rigging.
stronger.
Yes, well, rigged, right? Because often what happens with, especially on the Democratic side, depending on who the pundit is they'll try to associate stealing with rigged because that's the term
Hmm.
that Trump has used. But rigged in the sense, like I meant, like Katie Porter out in California meant, was the game rigged in favor of. And in this case, in those states that I mentioned, if you don't allow candidates on the ballot, then you've rigged the election,
Mm,
whether or not you make the argument, because what'll happen is, especially in those arguments in Florida, for example, they say that none of us candidates met the requirements in time to get onto the ballot, which the requirement was that we need to get in touch with the Florida Democrats. I myself and all the other candidates tried to reach out to the Democratic Party. I was unable to get in touch with anybody from the Democratic Party. I wasn't able to get in touch with the Secretary of State's office, and they had record of me being on their list. But what happened after the race was done, after I concluded my presidential race, the Democratic Party of Florida sent invitations to all the would-be candidates of the state. Well, they didn't realize they sent me an invite, and so I invited Frankie Lozada, and I recorded the whole thing. And I asked a question at the end: "Why did you not allow presidential candidates on the ballot?" And they asked us to put it in the queue. They deleted the question. So then I came on camera, interrupted, and asked the question. They muted me. So then they said, "We'd like you to ask the question into the queue." So I came on camera again. I said, "I did, but you deleted it." And they booted me out of the meeting. This is the type of tactics that are put in place to rig the election. And I use that term because I think that's the appropriate term, even though they'll make the argument that from a procedural standpoint, that myself, Dean Phillips, Marianne Williamson, who's been in the race forever,
Hmm.
didn't meet the requirements and in time. Well, that type of rhetoric is factually inaccurate because Marianne Williamson, who had a long-standing campaign, would have met the requirements well in advance if that had been articulated properly. But that's where the key is, that the Democratic Party will take these steps and not present that to the public because why would they? That would not sit
Yeah.
well for them.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, it feels like the state of voting is still stuck in the same using the same technology as, like, you know, before computers and stuff. And like maybe back in the day they were like, well, we can't print out, 1,000 people's names or whatever. But nowadays, like, imagine if you went to Amazon and you're trying to buy something and there were only two choices for
Yeah.
for a product. It'd be just crazy, like. And yet and if you're such a strong front runner, you should be embrace that, there's an open primary and there's a lot of competition, and then you get the nomination and everybody was like, yeah, well,
Yep.
that guy had the most votes, so they should get the nomination. But we'll never know. We'll never know. I mean, certainly I have to give it to Biden that he did have a pretty strong Super Tuesday outcome. And as much as I was hoping to see more for Phillips and for Williamson and yourself and others, like, it seems like the Democratic Party voters are resigned to just riding with Biden.
Yeah, I would say that that may have been the outcome regardless if we had been covered
Hmm.
properly, if we had enough time to actually engage with constituents. Like I can only speak from my vantage compared to Marianne and Dean's perspective. Both of them had $5 and $6 million available as part of their campaign coffers. I had $1,000.
Hmm.
So my resources drastically different, right? But with that $1,000, I was able to get a voter acquisition cost of 1.7 cents. And for the 5 races that Dean and Marianne we were on together on Super Tuesday, Dean was $46 per vote, Marianne was $30 per vote. So it's one of those things that in this race, if the proper, let's say, the traditional means were available, a Democratic primary, excuse me, a debate that the DNC never put on. There was a national debate that I participated in. Jason Palmer participated, Frankie Lozada, Stephen Lyons. Dean Phillips was invited, but he didn't show. Those type of actions would have enabled voters to find different voices, because the only reason why I got in this race was because I knew that voters were actively looking for somebody not named Biden. And you see that
Hmm.
more clearly than ever, especially with how things are going with Palestine and Israel. The big uncommitted movement that has happened is because people are dissatisfied with his actions on that subject specifically, but most of the voters are not interested in Biden or Trump, as I mentioned previously before we started the campaign. And so this was the opportunity of, at least in my voting age time, for somebody else to have enough of a chance to break through, because I know that people are dissatisfied with the oldest candidates in history who are also happen to be very polarizing, and just because of being in the limelight so long and having a history of, okay, we've seen what your leadership amounts to. And so that's where I'm specifically frustrated by, is even with Dean Phillips, had he had more exposure, and he probably had the most exposure in terms of legacy media compared. I know that it would have been fruitful at least to have some engagement, because Biden never had to debate anybody. Biden never had to present anything of a plan to his vision for America. Same thing with Trump. At least the Republican Party had several debates for at least the exposure of what their
Hmm.
other candidates could, their vision of America could look like. And that's where I'm disheartened by this process of what we have in this two-party system, this duopoly.
Yeah, it is. It is ironic that in some ways, the Republican Party, for all its faults, made more of an effort to um, surface alternatives than the Democratic Party, which is, kind of the talking point is that democracy is on the line, and then it's like, yeah, but we're gonna
Right,
pick our we're gonna pick our nominee without a real competitive process.
right. You're the
Um,
protectors of democracy, and
yeah,
yet the actions you're taking are antithetical to democracy. I'm not
yeah,
buying it.
yeah. It's unfortunate.
Yep.
What did you? Let's jump to today. Just as two Americans who care about the country, I have two topics that are hot for me. One is America's policy of arming the bombing of 6 months of bombings of Gaza. And then the second is the student loan relief initiative by Biden. Maybe we'll start with the Gaza stuff.
Yeah.
What's your read on where we are, and what should the country do?
Sure, sure. Well, if I may start with something that I need help with. So, as running for president of the United States, I had a lot of people reach out, including a resource that has 50 million surgical masks that I'm trying to get a portion of that out to Gaza. I'm having a terrible time trying to get in touch with anybody from either Red Crescent or Zakat or any other organization that I can try and get those supplies to, because it's unfortunate, as I said on the debate stage, that our leverage as America is much higher, and we've seen more recently Biden finally used that leverage to get aid going into Gaza, because ultimately, as I said on the debate stage, this is genocide, and now we're complicit with all of this armaments, and now we're rearming for potentially more devastation. Uh, I personally would like to see people have peace, and I think, from my vantage, that Netanyahu's ambitions of staying in office is basically tied to how long he can keep this um, military action running, right? Because he knows he's got consequences to face, and that's the reality. But our actions in this, just from funding to armaments, I'm disappointed. I know a lot of people are disappointed because Palestinians, um, they unfortunately they get conflated with Hamas, and that's the talking points that are used, especially by the IDF. Well, if Hamas is hiding amongst the innocent civilians, well, we can't help it if we kill some people in the act of trying to take them out. Well, ultimately, that's absurd, because the tactics that were deployed by bombing residencies, knowing that Hamas had tunnels, knowing that they were not going to be affected like the innocent civilians would have been, um, demonstrates that were the actions actually to eliminate Hamas. I would say otherwise, because if you wanted to eliminate Hamas, it's not appropriate to go and kill innocent civilians knowing that they're hiding amongst the innocent civilians. And you'll never kill Hamas's ideology with violence. That's just not how things are done. And so here we are at this point in this juncture. I've called for no more funding. I've written a letter to the White House. I've marched with the Palestinians because I know that this is important, that we have to stop our involvement and using more leverage, because we're coming up with silly little talking points about building a port to get aid in when we just saw Biden just made a phone call and was like, look, we're going to threaten taking away that support. And what happens? The floodgates open for aid to come in now, where it had been postponed and it had been stopped altogether for what, several months now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard to argue that the blocking of aid into Gaza by Netanyahu wasn't part of Netanyahu's strategy to basically lay siege to Gaza and withhold food and medicine as a tactic to just really decimate the 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 area of Gaza. I mean, you can't what other reason? I mean, they would say like, oh well, we wouldn't know if there's military uh aid being provided through the humanitarian channels. Like, come on, man. Like, that is not justification for
Right,
starving a population.
right. That's collective punishment,
Yeah.
right? And one of the things that really aggravated me personally, while I was on the campaign trail, I had the woman I love. She was deployed out in Jordan. So when that post 22 was attacked, she was actually the surgeon at that location, and where three of our soldiers were killed. And that's something that I take personal, because our involvement and our complicity in attacking um, Hezbollah, that escalated things to create violence to even the person that I love. Thankfully, she returned yesterday, but this whole time, it's been very infuriating. Being the average American, this is what average Americans experience, right? Because you don't see Biden's loved ones out on the front line in this instance. I was the only presidential candidate that probably had somebody on the front lines. I know that Nikki Haley's husband was somewhere, but I don't know that he was in harm's way like mine was. And so I'm particularly affected. But again, I'm the average American, so that's just par for the course, and that's why I'm very, very frustrated with the Democratic Party, especially Biden's actions and complicity in the support of this genocide.
Yeah, it's so sad that actually across all three of the candidates, Biden, Trump, and RFK, I don't think any of them are particularly willing to push back on Netanyahu
Yeah.
and put conditions on military aid or pause military aid. And this whole argument that, hey, and this is where I actually differed with Congressman Phillips. Yeah, I get it. There's 120 hostages. That's terrible. That doesn't
Hmm.
mean you can kill 30,000 civilians.
Right.
Like,
Right.
come on.
If the goal was to retrieve the hostages, you don't bomb the location where the hostages would be, right?
Yeah.
So right off the bat, you see the talking points fell flat, and I made that point on the debate stage as well, because that's unacceptable activity. And of course, interviewing for the president of the United States and being commander in chief, you're supposed to prioritize Americans. Well, there are American hostages at that time, right? So why would we allow that to take place? And Biden, bear hugging his way, obviously fell flat because you've got so many people. Latest number is 30,000, but we know it's much higher than that, right? Because you've got people that are buried in rubble. You have numbers that
Yeah.
we cannot retrieve until we have a true accounting. This is an unacceptable state of affairs that we are complicit in.
Yeah. And even if just to be balanced here. Now, some people will say out of those 30,000, there's maybe thousands of Hamas fighters. Okay, let's say 10,000 were Hamas fighters. It's still
Yeah.
20,000
Mhm.
civilians
Yeah.
for 120 hostages. It just doesn't add up for me. And I think the other thing that frustrates me is I don't know that as many Americans are thinking about the implications for our security
Mhm.
because we are being lumped together with the Netanyahu policy.
Yeah.
I think people know where a lot of those 2,000-pound bombs are manufactured and paid for, and it's not
Yeah.
in the heart of Israel. They come from another country.
Yep.
Um, and I think people know which country has vetoed like multiple UN ceasefire bills.
Right.
Yeah, it's not Russia; it's the U.S. Um,
Right.
so if
And
you are some unhinged extremist, you may think of the U.S. as uh, aiding and abetting this activity in Gaza that's resulting in all these dead Palestinians.
and that's where I tell you about my partner almost being killed, right? This is the
Hmm.
result of our involvement. That these things don't just happen in a vacuum, and this action is much like the activity that was taken after World War One, where we saw the rise of Hitler as a response to the aggression that was taken on the German people, and then comes this devastation. Now, what we learned from World War Two is we shouldn't be punitive in the manner that was pursued in World War One. In the same way, we shouldn't be punitive towards the Palestinians and towards going forward. We need to come to a reconciliation and a peaceful reconciliation, so that way we can bring something else. Because the ideology is only going to be spreading further and faster. Because now you've got all these people that have been impacted, and there's that song from Les Mis about the young pup growing up, and the pup turns into a dog and wants to look out for him, right? So all those that are currently going through this devastation and being traumatized, you better believe that at some point in time they're going to be radicalized and say, "Look, who was involved? Israel, United States. You've only further emboldened this message that who's the enemy." You're not going to get peace with violence. It doesn't work like that. So this is where I'm concerned as an American, for my fellow Americans especially, that retaliation is coming, and we're seeing that the current threat is taking place with Israel and Iran. That something is going to happen. I'm grateful that my loved one was out of the Middle East, but guess what? There are many loved ones that are going to be feeling some ramifications, and that equals people's lives, and I'm just as concerned for them as well. This is why we need to have a ceasefire, and things need to go in the direction of a two-state solution from my vantage. And I've spoken with many Palestinians that agree that that's the case, but ultimately, our actions are still going to generate some consequence for us. It's my belief.
Yeah, and as much as I am disappointed in Biden's sort of unconditional, unlimited military support of Netanyahu, I feel like Congress should also be held accountable. Like they're able to gum up the system and cause a big ruckus about whatever they care about, but I haven't heard. I certainly don't see my congressional representative or my our senators in California like really uh, putting their foot down and saying we need to pause military aid until.
Why do you
Um,
think that is?
that's a tough one. I mean, I think they're worried about coming across as anti-Semitic because for whatever reason, people I think conflate supporting Israel with supporting Netanyahu, and it's like no, actually, Netanyahu is very unpopular in Israel. Like Israelis don't like
Right,
him either.
right.
And a lot of the families of the hostages actually feel that Netanyahu doesn't give a crap about those hostages, and he's just
And
prolonging
they're right
this.
by that, right? There's
Yeah.
validation. Actions speak louder than words, right? So that's where I think their um, citizens are also tired of the lip service that we're getting as well on this side, saying that um, we're here just to support Israel, yet we can't do anything about it. And so, with respects to members of Congress, like Dina Titus is my congressional representative, and she's got lots of financial support from Israel-backed organizations, and that's where my thought is. While many of those members of Congress will not speak up because they've been paid not to, right? Because you got to look at the funding. As the premise of my campaign was, money in politics has corrupted everything, and so there's a reason why you see things like John Fetterman, who's done a 80 from going and running as a progressive to now saying he's not progressive and draping himself in the flag of Israel. You have to follow the money, right? Because this is what has happened to our country, and the results aren't just corruption, lives at stake.
I am sure there is definitely an impact of financing of campaigns with whatever a candidate, you know, um, ends up, you know, supporting. I'm sure that is a factor. I
Mhm.
also think that for so many decades, um, for good reasons, people were like, "Hey, you know what? Israel is a democratic country, and its history and origins came out of a terrible genocide conducted by the Germans, and so we want to be for Israel." And I
Oh yeah,
totally agree with, you know,
yeah,
but that
me
doesn't
too.
mean that you can fund and arm it to annihilate its neighbors, even if the neighbor attacked it, which it did. Like, I'm not justifying 10/7 at all. That was a
Yeah, no,
tragedy.
of course not, of course
Yeah,
not. That
but,
Hamas
you
is
know,
that needs to be
there's some
addressed.
proportionality there too. So yeah, I'm not happy with either RFK, Trump, or Biden. It's so sad. Like, what the hell are we supposed to do? Like, I guess, you know, maybe Stein or West are probably closer on this one. But let's talk about. We could talk about Israel for a long time, but I do want to talk
Yeah, we
about
could.
another topic, which isn't quite as kind of, you know, doesn't have the same humanitarian implications, but it does have policy implications in terms of the student debt relief efforts that Biden is, you know, becoming well known for.
Mhm.
I'll be upfront. I'm not in favor of them. I'll explain why momentarily, but
Sure.
I'd be
No,
curious to
please.
kind of get your thoughts on, you know, how do you feel about what about the initiatives?
Yeah, so here's where my perspective is. I look at it from the lens of having lived in 11 cities, 2 countries. I understand the advantages of all the perspectives of all those places I've lived. They're not all in alignment with, yes, let's give funding for those students, relief funding. From my vantage and the policy that I leaned into most, again, Andrew Yang's freedom dividend was my talking point around this subject, because I know that there's a lot of pushback in terms of the student relief effort. So if we were to implement UBI and everybody was given $1,000 a month, for those that have this um, very costly education debt, guess how you're going to address that? That UBI is going to be able to do that, and that's palatable for everybody, because when it's all said and done, we all made decisions of whether or not to go to school, and the decision is where I stand in saying, okay, I understand it was super expensive, and it was impressed upon us that we need to get our education in order to advance in our career and have the American dream, that having a house, and which again, that's seeming untenable for many millennials and Gen Z and back. But these decisions were made. So if we were just to give money for people that made these informed decisions, it doesn't seem fair, and much of the country would agree with that. But how do we serve that? The spirit of it is still being served with universal basic income. So that's where I stand on it. Is I would prefer implementation of the freedom dividend to address that.
Yeah. Yeah, I land in the same place. I also feel like it is really unfair to those people who chose to go to college, who took out loans and then paid those loans back.
Mhm.
It doesn't really. do anything for those people. They basically feel
That
like
was
they
me.
were suckers and
Hmm.
paid back their loans, and then their neighbor who didn't pay back their loans just got them waived. Not
Sure.
to mention the people who are in school now. What are they supposed to think? Like maybe they shouldn't pay their loans back because they'll get bailed out in a
Right.
few years as well. Like, how does this
Right.
work? And then we're not solving the root cause, which is higher education is too freaking expensive. And
Hmm.
there's no incentive to reduce those costs if the government's going to basically fund, you know, $500,000 kind of college experiences for people.
Well, and this is
So
where
yeah.
the corruption takes place, right? Because it was the Democrats that passed the you cannot have your student loan debt cannot be waived if you file for bankruptcy, right? So this is fueling that corruption because, all right, we found a mechanism for money to go into various coffers, and now that money cannot be waived if you need to file for bankruptcy. So let's just throw more money at it. It's basically akin to the mortgage crisis, right, where we had lots of exploitation taking place, and then we took care of that by funding those that exploited people. And I believe it was AIG. I remember when they got um,
Hmm.
their cash, they ended up paying out all of their bonuses, and that was a slap in the face under the I think it was the Obama administration. So this feels in the same vein as that to me.
Yeah, this one is certainly the lenders are going to be probably okay. The borrowers who are not going to pay back their loans are very happy with this, I'm sure. And then the rest of us kind of are going to basically subsidize this. And
Right.
it may also increase our national debt, which will likely not help with inflation. So it's
Right.
like, wow, I'm all for people paying their fair share. I paid a lot of taxes over the years. I just wish the taxes would go to things that help people in a fair and efficient way.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I wholeheartedly agree, and I think most Americans do. The pushback that I often hear, especially around taxation, people are reluctant to have increased taxes because what do they get in response for those taxes? Well, here in America, virtually little. We get bombs, we get wars, we
Mm.
get programs that are full of bureaucracy and inefficient, right? That's where I think the beauty of the UBI empowers people to make decisions for themselves to go solve their own problems. And that's for me, that's why I leaned into that so heavily because we have a lot of need. And there's been a concentration of wealth and a concentration of power as a result of the ability to buy politicians by funding them, right? Because if you can contribute unlimited amounts to uh, political action committees, well, what stops anybody from getting what they want if they have enough capital to do so? That's the system that we have, and that's why we're subjected to a Biden v. Trump 2.0, even though the vast majority of us do not want that.
Yeah. Well, Gabriel, it's been a pleasure reconnecting with you, and I share your frustration and concern. And you talked about Yang's freedom dividend proposal. The other one that I really feel now even more strongly about was the democracy dollars proposal, where every
Mhm.
citizen gets $100 and they can give it to any candidate they want. I mean, think what a difference that would have made for you and Phillips and Williamson.
Yeah,
You guys
for
could
sure.
have really put yourselves out there and got the word out in a way that right now, I mean, you look at the Phillips campaign, like he was independently wealthy. He was able to fund a lot of that effort. How
Yeah.
is it that we live in a country where you have to be a multi millionaire to run for office, and even then,
Uh, by
you don't
design,
get
right?
it. Yeah, it's unfortunate for
Yeah.
sure.
Well, I lived in Canada. They had a public uh, funding of elections, so I prefer that methodology. But of course, the democracy dollars are just as advantageous. There's an organization called Represent Us. I'm part of that organization, especially here in Nevada. That's one of those proposals that they're trying to get implemented. In the state of Nevada, if you're watching this, we have a vote yes on 3, which is at least offering the opportunity to get ranked choice voting involved as a way to try to circumvent this duopoly that we have, or this choice of zero sum game. So these are, uh, I guess, those efforts that are being put in place or attempting to be put in place to try to mitigate what has come and turned into the wealthiest among us get to participate in these elections, and that's it.
Yeah. I wonder if a billionaire out there could put together a fund where they would say, "Hey, look, any citizen can get $100 that we'll donate at their request to any candidate running." I think that would be incredibly disruptive
That's interesting.
because because it's like, hey, the billionaire's not giving it to any candidate. He's going to let every individual choose,
Mhm.
and then the individuals who want to support their candidate can register and ask for that money to be deployed to whichever one they want. And I bet if we had something like that, we would have seen a lot more competition this time, and but we didn't. And I,
Well,
I appreciate you putting in a good fight, Gabe.
of course. Well, I'll tell you, I don't want to leave on a sour note because I actually concluded my presidential run. But given the experience and the mission that I set out on to try to improve the lives of average Americans, I have declared my independence, and I'm actually running for Congress here in District 1 in Nevada to take on Dina Titus, who is a 12, 12-year, sixth-term incumbent, 73 years old. She's got all the financial backing that she could need, but I think that we need new leadership, and we need somebody that's here to fight for average Americans. Because, like you said, we're happy to pay taxes, but if the value is going to things that aren't our family, then this just feels like we're spinning our wheels, and the result is we've got a lot of friction in society, and it feels like society is coming apart at this. Watch a movie that is predicated on that premise, civil war, right? Uh, That doesn't just come out of nowhere. These are things that are the result of this imbalance that we have in our marketplaces. We don't have an efficient market, and we have a lot of corruption. So how do we circumvent that? We have to get people in to Congress, either who are walking with the intent of making change or have the receipts. Like in my case, I have receipts for everything, demonstrating my character and the actions that I want to see happen, because that's what it's going to take. Outside of that, there's going to be either friction, or there has to be an amendment to the current election process that we have today.
Well, that's exciting to hear that you're running for Congress in this cycle, right?
Yep, that's correct. Yeah, so
Yeah.
I had to conclude my presidential race just in time to be able to declare for the congressional run. I knew that, given that the lay of the land with the Democratic Party, and I'll use the term again, rigged for Biden, how else can I still have this impact, right? The next iteration comes in the form of trying to address it here at the congressional level. And that means, at least with my experience and having a smaller territory to cover versus having 50 plus races
Hmm.
to cover, I'm going to take the experience I gained and still bring the same energy and fight. Um, and hopefully, we can have the opportunity to make actual change for the betterment of our communities and for our families.
That's great. And where can people learn more about your congressional campaign?
Yeah, so it's the same as the presidential campaign. So it's Gabe, GABE24.com. And then my handle right there, I predominantly on Instagram and TikTok. I don't use um, Twitter or X that frequent. I know that we talked briefly about that's how we met, but I don't engage with it too much because it's just a lot of negative
Hmm.
information on there. But if you want to take a look, Gabe24.com, or my handle, the Gabriel Cornejo, on TikTok or Instagram. Those are where I put out video messages about policies that I think need to be implemented, and coverage, and including all the different documentation I've put for the Democratic Party and how they've rigged the races in favor of Biden by keeping us us, the presidential candidates at that time, off the ballot because a lot of that stuff isn't something that most of the public are privy to, and you're not going to hear that in legacy media either. So if you want to take a look, if you want to donate to the cause, I would greatly appreciate that because this is average American can't do this alone, and so I'm learning from the presidential race of how we can actually have impact. And I was very successful with the amount of resources that I had relative to other challengers.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited to follow your congressional race, and I hope that the time running for president kind of gave you a lot of capabilities and experience that'll make your congressional campaign even stronger.
Yeah.
And all for competition. So best of luck to you, and folks can learn more about you at gabe24.com, and hopefully we'll get you back on the show soon.
Yes, sir. Thank you again. I appreciate it. See you later,
Take
nerds.
care, Gabriel. See you later. Bye, nerds. All right. Nice dude. Good old Gabriel Cornejo. I enjoyed briefly meeting him in person. And Gabriel, if you're still watching the live stream or you see this on replay, wish I could have spent more time chatting with you. Unfortunately, as part of the advance team, like you're either setting up an event or taking it down, and I didn't want my teammates to feel like I was just like hobnobbing with other candidates. But what do you all think in the chat of the conversation? I mean, it's kind of sad that on the Gaza thing, like we literally have no options from any of the three leading candidates in the presidential. They're all the same. And then on the student loan relief or bailout, whatever you want to call it, like, I mean, so frustrating that number one, that will go towards increasing inflation. Like, you cannot keep spending money and taking on more debt as a country and not have it affect the value of your currency. Yeah, that's kind of Econ 101 or Macro 101. And then on the whole Democratic primary, like I'm pretty sure I'm not going to cast my vote for either of the two party nominees, unless the Democratic Party has a unexpected change of nominee, which I doubt. But you know, that's not to say that I'm trying to help Trump get elected. If there's anything that I'm more concerned about, it's another 4 years of Trump. Even though I don't like the Democratic Party's activities, and I'm very frustrated with Biden and his readiness to lead for the next 4 years, and I'm not comforted by the notion of Harris being president. I really don't want to see Trump ever again in public office. However, since I live in a dark blue state of California, I do have the power to make my voice heard and support another candidate, just to kind of send a signal to the two parties that you know, this you guys need to change how you run things, or you're gonna get challenged big time in 2028. So if you live in a blue state and you are like me and you are a never Trumper, if it's a dark blue state, you know, like don't do this if you're in Georgia or Michigan or something. But if you're like in Massachusetts or California, you know, you do have options to kind of like shake things up and kind of send a signal. I will give you some more closing thoughts, but before we do that, I do want to thank the people who make this show possible. And that is our channel members. And if you're watching this and you like this content, if you could help us cover our costs for streaming and podcast hosting and some software for like thumbnails and stuff like that, you can click the join button and that will allow you to contribute as little as $1.99 a month. And it helps us keep this channel going and helps us make more content. So consider it. And for those of you who are already members, I want to give you all a little bit of recognition. And we will start with our most senior member, who is Soldier One. And actually, Soldier One sent me a note, and he wanted me to give a shout out to his mom, who unfortunately passed away. And so let me see if I can pull up. Oh no, I'm gonna have to see if I remember my password. Okay, here we go. Soldier One, here it is. Cancel. Come on, too many tabs open here. Okay, I have a picture here of Soldier One and his mom. Let's see. Share screen. So this is Soldier One's and Andrew Yang and his mom. And she was a big member of the Yang Gang, and unfortunately she passed away. And I just wanted to take a moment to thank her, Nancy Sullivan, who was a pioneering female computer programmer who helped write the space shuttle engine control algorithms. And she was a massive Andrew Yang supporter. Knocked on doors with Soldier One and Paget in Iowa. You guys remember Iowa, and you remember Paget, and so rest in peace, Nancy, and thank you for everything you did for your country and for your family. Okay, let's thank the other members. In addition to Soldier One, who is a senior vice president, we have our VPs, Kristen Slevin and Bike. Kristen has been a member for 51 months. Bike for 41 months. How long has Soldier One? Soldier One has been a member for 47 months. You guys are old school, man. Nerds for Yang kind of vintage. And then at the hardcore level, we have Gene, David, DK, Jackalego, Mr. History, Mona, Vaughn, Yang, Dean, Galessa, Jay Perrin, Dana, Jason, Daniel, Mickey, Yoda, Jackson, Unkiyu, and Bobby. And then at the entry level, the verified nerds, only $1.99 a month. I will scroll through them, and this is in order of time as a member. So the folks that are at the top are some of the oldest verified nerds. And then as we go to the bottom, we have some of our younger nerds. So thank you, all of you, for supporting the channel. Okay, now, oh, by the way, if you listen to audio podcasts, subscribe. And if you can do me a solid, leave a review. I think there's only one review, or maybe a few, of Nerds for Humanity on the Apple podcast directory and the Android one. So wherever you listen to podcasts, number one, subscribe so you can listen to these conversations on the road or when you're doing work around the house. But number two, if you can write a review, that'd be great, so more people can discover. And the bigger the audience we have, the more kind of we can get some hard to reach guests. So when I invite them to come on the show, I'll get more yeses. As you can imagine, let's say I wanted to get like Fetterman on, or I wanted to get Katie Porter on. The more I can say, hey, there's a large audience on the show, the better. And how you can help me, in addition to subscribing, is to write a review and share out the content so we get discovered by more people. So yeah, let's just wrap it up with any interesting comments in the chat. Hello, John. Hello, Vaughn. Vaughn being a little sarcastic. Yeah, everybody, I think a lot of us are big UBI fans. Does money even make sense anymore? Well, I'll tell you, I think now we are either close to or spending as much on interest on the national debt as we are on our own military. And like, if we keep piling up this debt, at some point, the country will pay more on interest to service that debt than on like Medicare and Social Security and everything else. So I think when we had like ultra low interest rates, you could kind of borrow and it didn't feel like it would cost that much. But I think, that time is gone. Earl, I'm not voting for Biden or Trump. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, what I would say, Earl, is if you're not voting for those two, just make sure you vote for someone. Don't stay home, because I think it's more impactful to send a message that people actively went out and voted and they chose someone other than the two parties. There's a lot of, other candidates out there. You're not voting for those other parties because you think they're going to win. They won't. Very unlikely. But I think if the bigwigs at the GOP and the DNC, they see like, oh crap, 20% of the voters pick someone other than the two parties, it will maybe cause them to change their ways or give encouragement to third parties to make an even bigger effort in 2028. Yeah, Paget in Iowa. Yeah, I think Paget's no longer doing much in politics or policy. But if I had to guess, I'm guessing she probably would be looking at RFK because she's a little bit of a kind of anti-establishment kind of perspective, which I respect. Yes, and thanks again to Nancy, an amazing contribution. And Lisa, follower since the beginning. Love it. Appreciate it. And appreciate you. You can tell Lisa's a member because she has that little member icon. So thank you, Lisa. Appreciate everything you do. All right. I hope you guys have a great day and have a wonderful weekend. And we'll see you next time. Bye, nerds.